Thank you, Vince. Thank you. So hi, everybody. I'm David Hollingsworth. As you see, I'm an MBA, PMP, CISSP, ITIL expert. I'm also a certified social media security professional. I'm also Amazon Web Services accredited business and technical professional. I have more letters behind my last name than are in my last name. That doesn't mean I'm smart. It does mean that I know how to take tests. And I'm going to talk with you about my experience in the PMP exam and help you pass on your next attempt, or hopefully your first and last attempt. So first, let's start with a story. In the 1970s, I worked at WZWZ 93.5 FM in Kokomo, Indiana, and I was a gopher, which meant I would go for whatever stuff the guys, the real DJs, would want from the store. But occasionally they would let me on the air. I'd play records, I would do news, sports, and weather. But being Kokomo, Indiana, there wasn't much news, and there wasn't any traffic, so mostly I did the weather. In order to be a full-time DJ at WZWZ, you had to have an FCC third-class operator license. And what that gave you was a certification that you could turn the transmitter on or off, turn the lights on and off, and make sure that in case the real engineer wasn't in the building, you wouldn't get in trouble with the FCC. It's actually a fairly easy test. There was a book, I studied the book, I took the practice tests, but I was kind of cocky when I was in high school. I was a straight A student, I never took a book home. That meant that the material that I was studying wasn't that hard. Well, the time came for the exam, and my dad drove me from Kokomo to Chicago, which is about a 4-hour drive. We parked downtown, went to the Federal Building. My dad hung out in the coffee shop while I took the exam. I thought, this thing's easy. Breezed right through it, turned my exam in, waited 30 minutes while they graded it. And then when they called my name, I came up and they said, "We're sorry, you failed the exam." It was a long, slow ride back to Kokomo. I eventually did pass the test, but my dad wasn't going to take me. He made me get on a Greyhound bus from Kokomo to go to Chicago, which takes a lot longer than 4 hours. So over time, I learned that when you're taking an exam, it's important to know what you're studying, what's going to be on the test, and then how to take that test. So first, some facts about the PMP exam. Before I get started too far here, how many people have yet to pass the exam? A couple, and so many of you have passed, and many of you have that's still on your bucket list. Today, there are about 800,000 PMPs worldwide. According to Monster, Robert Half, and Global Knowledge, it's one of the most desired certifications. And according to a number of salary surveys, somebody who's a project manager who has a PMP versus who doesn't have a PMP, salaries are on average 20% higher. A quick search on LinkedIn last week shows over 10,000 project manager jobs in LinkedIn. And most have the PMP as a requirement or as highly desirable, and especially when you're working with the federal government, it's usually a must-have requirement. However, the PMP exam first-time fail rate can be as high as 40%. Now I say your mileage may vary because where I got that figure was from one of the people selling exam testing products. So it's always good to check your sources to make sure that that fact is in fact accurate. So to qualify for the exam, those of you who are already PMPs know that it is a chore to fill out the qualification forms. With a 4-year college degree, you need roughly 3 years of leading and directing projects. If you only have a high school diploma or associate's degree, you need 7,500 hours or 5 years of leading projects, plus 35 hours of contact project management training. And contact can mean online, it could be boot camp, it could be webcast, it could be a number of things, and it doesn't have to be just one course. It has to be cumulative 35 hours. And you have to document your PM experience. And some of you say, well, I'm not a project manager. I'd always wanted to be one. I have to have goals. But if you don't currently meet the qualifying requirements, you can get what's called the Certified Associate Project Manager certification. Supposedly, it's easier. Supposedly, it's not as challenging. It is definitely less expensive, $225 versus $555 if you're not a PMI member. And it's 150 questions versus 200 questions. One of the things that I found was I actually took the CAPM as a practice exam for the PMP. Here's a secret. It's the same test. It's just 50 questions shorter. And is that mine? Okay, thank you. I always want to ask before I take a drink of somebody else's water bottle. So if your company does reimburse exams, sometimes you may want to take the CAPM exam first, because if they only reimburse past exams, there's less risk with taking the CPM than the PMP. And some current exam info. We are on Pmbok version 6 as of 2017, and there are a number of changes from version 5. They have a new chapter on effective leadership for project managers. They've renamed a bunch of things, but really, they're still the same exact thing. Schedule management is previously called time management. Resource management used to be called human resource management. And every knowledge area now features 4 new sections. And this is really, I think, an attempt to make the Pmbok less of a non-narcotic sleep aid. Because they actually summarize what you're going to talk about in each chapter. They talk about the key concepts, trends and emerging practices so that they can stay current. Tailoring considerations, because one of the complaints I hear about Pmbok, about IDLE, about every framework is, well, this doesn't fit us. Everything gets tailored. And also to stay current with Agile, is now they have a chapter on Agile. So an attempt to stay current. So before we talk about how to pass the exam, I passed out a quiz before the class. And do you mind if I look at the? Sure. Okay. We're gonna see how you did. So Run for the Border is from. Great. You're in good hands with. Think Different. Apple. What is the San Francisco treat? See, that's a good one. Good to the last drop. Be all that you can be. Just do it. I'm loving it. Melts in your mouth, not in your hands. Like a good neighbor. Now, I wish like either State Farm or Allstate, I wish I had Dennis Haysbert's voice, but the few, the proud, you are now free to move about the country. Right. There are some things that money can't buy. For everything else, yeah, all the news that's fit to print. New York Times, very good. And can you hear me now? Did anybody study for this test? These are just things that you knew because they've been repeated so many times that they're just part of your consciousness. They're back in your rear brain. Now, some interesting things about this. Be all you can be was discontinued as a slogan in 2001. The last Rice-A-Roni commercial I remember with that music was like 1996. Some of these things are 20 and 30 years old that you haven't had any exposure to, but it's been repeated so many times, you just know it. And that really is the secret of passing the PMP exam. So I'm going to talk about how do we learn, how does it apply to the PMP, and really these techniques can be applied to any exam because I've used them multiple times, and so far they've worked. I'll talk about learning the material, preparing for the exam, and taking the exam. Talked about the quiz. So when we learn anything, there are 4 stages of learning anything. The first is called unconscious incompetence. We don't know what we don't know. How many people here are concert level violin players? How many people actually even cared if they were concert level violin players? It's not important to you, so you don't know what you don't know. You're unconsciously incompetent. It doesn't matter to you. How many people here have ever tried to drive a stick shift? How many people found it very difficult? Okay, the second stage of learning something is where you're called consciously incompetent. You know that you don't know something. You know, you're sitting in the car, you're putting in the clutch, you're holding on the emergency brake, you're putting the throttle forward, you're like hoping that you're not on a hill, you're not going to roll back into somebody back of you. And it's difficult because you have to think, what is the next thing I've got to do? But given some time, given some practice, you can move from the second stage to the third stage, which is called consciously competent. You know what you know. You know that when you're on a hill, you pull up the emergency brake, you push in the clutch, you push in the throttle, you start to feather on the throttle, you let the emergency brake go, let off the brake, and let off the clutch, and off you go. But you have to think through that every time. You know what you know. And where we want to get to is where you were with all the questions I just asked you. Is you're unconsciously competent. You don't know what you already know. Things have moved from the front of your brain to long-term memory, that you've already got them back there, they're just ready for you to access them. So, how many people drive a stick shift today? It's kind of easy, isn't it? You don't think about it. You can shift, you can upshift, downshift, you can put on the brakes, you can get on your phone, you can hold a cup of Starbucks, you can do all these things you're not supposed to do. Because the mechanics of driving a stick shift car are now in your long-term memory. So you always want to move with a new skill from not knowing what you need to know to not knowing what you already know. And I'm going to tell you how to do that. There are three types of inputs that we use for learning. Now, there are some people who say that one is better than the other, and I really don't believe that. But as adults, the way we learn most things is auditory. I'm telling you something, and you're listening. And hopefully, you'll remember it when you come out of here. If you're like me, 5 minutes after you leave is, what was that guy's name again? In visual is most common in grade school through college. Teacher is up here writing things on the board. You're looking at that. You're writing things down. You're trying to remember visually what you've read. Then the earliest stage of learning is called kinesthetic. It's actually you feel, you touch, you smell, you taste, you do all these things that infants do. And then most common from birth to grade school. Now, which method is best? Does anybody have a guess? Kinesthetic. Okay, any others? Now, this is a trick question. There is no one best method. However, they all work together. And the more senses you can involve, the more likely you're able to retain something long term. I want you to imagine something with me for a moment. Close your eyes. It's Thanksgiving. You're in your parents' kitchen. You can smell the turkey in the oven. You can hear your siblings arguing in the next room. You can hear your dad snoring as he's watching the football game on TV. You can see all the plates laid out on the table. Now open your eyes. How many people could actually see, smell, or hear what was going on? These memories, once they're ingrained like that, are very permanent. And sense of smell is actually one that is extremely permanent. You can't really use sense of smell on the PMP. However, the more senses you involve, the more permanent that memory is going to be. So how does this apply to the PMP exam? I would wager that the PMP exam is no different than learning any other new skill. And there are three components of preparing for it, and really this does apply to other exam, is learning the material, preparing for the exam, and then finally taking the exam. How many people here read a book or self-studied for the exam? A few of you? Okay. There are a number of books. There's the Project Management Body of Knowledge, the Pmbok. There are a number of other books. There are boot camps and lots of other sources. So of books, How many people here used Rita Mulcahy's book to pass the exam? Rita's book is one of the most popular and one of the most effective for the exam. There are a number of others that I've used. In fact, I have everything on this list and more because I tend to study things. Kim Heltman writes a book called The Project Management Professional Exam Study Guide. Andy Crow's How to Pass on Your First Try. Joseph Phillips' PMP Study Guide, and Head First PMP. In terms of technical complexity, I think Joseph Phillips is probably the most technically complex. Rita is one of the more accessible ones, but the most accessible one is if you say, I have no idea what project management is, start with Head First PMP and work your way up from there. Okay, let's talk about the Pmbok. In the 6th edition, there are 2 rules about the Pmbok. Number 1, you should read it. Number 2, don't get hung up on it. As I said before, it is a non-narcotic sleep aid, non-habit forming. It is safe when used as directed, but there's no danger of addiction for reading the Pmbok. I read it twice, straight through. And it gives you a list of everything that you will see in the exam, but it doesn't give you context. It doesn't really help you prepare for the exam any more than just it's a list of stuff. Now, if you join PMI, you get a free PDF copy of this. Woo. And you should read it, but don't really get hung up on it. Other resources that make it a lot less complex. How many people here attended a boot camp? How many people here found it useful? There you go. Boot camps do have a number of advantages. They allow you to focus. They will tell you everything you need to know to pass the exam. And it will tell you just how ready you are. Because sometimes I've seen people in a boot camp come here and I'm like, I should have read the material. The disadvantages of them are they can be expensive. I did a search last night and I think the going rate was $1,895 to $2,400 for a 3.5, 4-day PMP boot camp course. They are risky because everything is thrown at you very quickly. The chance of retaining it long term is pretty low. If you take a boot camp, they do focus only on passing the exam. If you do a boot camp, make sure that you've got the test the next day, because the likelihood of you retaining that over the weekend is pretty low. I can walk from one room to another and say, why did I come in here? So you want to make sure that if you are doing a boot camp, that you do take the exam very shortly afterwards. Tons of other resources, and when I took the exam in 2011, some of these have become more popular, some less popular. Andy Crow has a set of flashcards, or a number of people have flashcards. Vince, you took the one where you laid all the cards out on the floor and you had to figure out which one went into which. There are a number of all-in-one guides, like laminated fold-outs, that show here's everything you need to know in one condensed format. There's a podcast called the Pmp Prep Cast. Has anybody taken that? It's run by a guy named Cornelius Fitchner, and it is very good. I did my 35 contact hours through that. Cornelius is very Swiss and very articulate, and by the time you get done with the course, you'll be tired of listening to Cornelius Fitchner because he talks exactly like this. So 35 hours of that, and you generally don't forget what he said. Yes, Mary? Mm-hmm. If somebody's looking for a resource, because I was worried about the boot camp being too fast. And even the 6 weeks or whatever, I think the next Saturday was a lot. That is another challenge of boot camps. A, they're expensive. B, they're very condensed, which makes your long-term memory success very low. When I was at the Pentagon, when I worked for SRA, I did teach in a PMP boot camp. I also developed a 13-week course that I taught at the Pentagon for our contractors, our fellow contractors, as well as the Govies. And it broke everything into one chapter every week. And the longer you can spread that out, the more likely you'll retain it. There are audio reviews. That was one of the things that I did. I would just put my iPod on and listen to the next section of the Pmbok is financial management. Then you get like 30 minutes of financial management. Boring as all get out, but one more sensory input source. Has anybody studied in a study group to get together with other people studying for the exam? I didn't do it because I tend to not work and play well with others, but some people have found it very effective because you can quiz each other on just how ready you are. And then there are a number of test question banks. Did anybody get like the 1,000 free PMP questions or anything like that? We'll talk about that in a moment. So in the structure of the exam, 200 questions, 25 of and you get, I think, 4 hours to do it. 25 are test questions. The passing rate is roughly 65%. Your mileage may vary on this because some questions are harder than others, and when the questions are harder, the pass mark goes down a bit. When they're easy, the pass rate goes up higher. And they are 4 choices or multiple choice, so there's only one right answer. If you guess, you've got a 25% chance. So comparing it to other exams, when I worked for Watson Wyatt, they're an actuarial firm in Arlington now. They're called Towers, Watson, Willis, something. And when they were taken over by Towers Perrin, I didn't have any certifications at all. I was like, oh, crap, what am I going to do? I've got to get something. So the first thing I did was get EIDL Foundation. I could buy the book on Monday, take the test on Friday, boom, you're done. The second exam I took was the CISSP, which is a bit of a jump in complexity because it's 250 questions. You get 6 hours to do it about IT security, including things like encryption and hashing schemes and all these fun things. I thought it was easier than the PMP because in the CISSP, the Certified Information Security Systems Professional certification, you either know it or you don't. With the PMP, a lot of these are context-sensitive questions, scenario-based questions, and we'll talk about why that's important in a moment. EIDL Foundation, again, if you've worked in IT for more than a week, you can probably walk in, take the exam today, pass it today. The intermediate and expert certifications are slightly different. Instead of 40, 200, 250 questions, you have 8 and 10 questions for each intermediate exam and 10 on the managing across the life cycle exam. They're only 8 or 10 questions. Each question has 5 points for the most correct answer, 3 points for, yeah, you're kind of good answer, 1 point for the least correct answer, and 0 points for the wrong answer. So you really have to parse words and phrasing and context to make sure that you've got the absolute best answer. So of the exams, I thought the EIDL intermediate and expert exams were harder, not because of complexity or their length, but just your reading comprehension skills have to be very strong. Being from Indiana, that was a challenge. So how do you prepare for the exam? When I took the exam, one of the things I found was very useful was to use multiple sources of material. Because Rita Mulcahy says things one way, Kim Heldman says things one way, Joseph Phillips says things one way. Everybody has their own unique spin on it. They're still covering the same material, but it's useful to have multiple sources. What I did was I set up a 90-day schedule. I had a goal of passing it in 3 months of self-study. And I do recommend that if you're going to self-study, you do take 3 months to do it. Because it's possible to do it in a week. I didn't do it in a week. And I know very few people who have done it in a week. And you're putting a lot more risk on passing the exam. So I took the Pmbok, I read it through 2 times. I never spent more than 30 minutes a night reading it. I'd like read a few chapters till I fell asleep. Next night I'd come back and read a few more. I did about 1 to 2 weeks to get through the Pmbok twice. Then the next round of about 1 to 2 weeks, I took my first book, which is Kim Heldman's book. Read it straight through, no quizzes, no end of chapter summaries. And then I did that for book 2 and book 3. And by the third round, which is about 2 to 4 weeks for each one, I did books 1 through 3 in depth. I took the pre-test, I took the end of chapter summaries, I did the exams for each one in turn. And by the time I got to month 3, this was getting to be fairly automatic. The danger of using one source, however, because I started with Kim Hellman's book, is I was able to memorize about 60 to 65 questions into the exam. This is A, B, B, C, I had the pattern. So there's a danger in only using one source. And round 3 is really just a repeat of round 2. It's reinforcing what you've already gone through. How many people love the brain dump? How many people, as soon as you had to do the brain dump, your brain just went blank? The first time I did it, I was like, I don't know any of this. The big thing in the brain dump to remember are the formulas, because those are the hardest and most arcane things in the Pmbok. Not only learn them, but also practice using them so that you're familiar with how this equation works. And then plan and structure how you're going to work through creating what you're going to put in the brain dump for the exam. So what I did was I took one of the all-in-one guides, which had, here's everything you need to know on the test, which had a list of all the formulas, the 9 knowledge areas, all the different components you would have to remember. And what I did was I put my notebook on the right-hand side and the formulas on the left-hand side. I looked at the formulas and I wrote them down without looking at what I was writing. So we go back to, how do you learn? When you learn things as a kid, kinesthetic is the most, you get the most done in the least time. Wrong, you're going to know. So I would do it by writing it down without looking at it. Then, after about a week or so, and I would do this in 5-minute shots. If I had 5 minutes between a meeting, I would do a brain dump. I took my notebook around with me everywhere. After about a week, I would start to cover up pieces of what I was trying to remember. Then I would try to recreate it, 1 or 2 lines at a time. And in about 3 weeks, I could do it automatically. You would be surprised, again, look at what you just did for the exam, the pop quiz I gave you. It's possible to have this almost as a reflex that you can generate a brain dump on command. Now, you don't want to do this permanently, because eventually you say, tell me everything you need to know about the Pmbok. You could do it. Not that anybody would want to listen. But you can recreate the brain dump so that it is a physical memory in addition to being a mental memory. So you practice, you practice, you practice some more. You'll be sick and tired of practicing. But practice does make permanent. So I asked about practice exams. There are a number of resources for practice exams out there. And they run from free to very expensive. In the Kim Hellman and Joseph Phillips books, they have practice exams included on a CD or DVD. Andy Crow has one that you can buy a license for. It's not very expensive. I think he includes a 90-day license for it in the book. And Rita's exam, last I checked, was like $2.99 for the CD. It's good. It's $300.
Is Rita's updated with the new Pmbok, or is it
Yes. Every one of the pictures I showed here and then the links I'll give you at the end have the most recent versions of everything. Everything is Pmbok 6. So make sure that you are studying Pmbok version 6, not version 5. The differences are not dramatic. You could probably study 5 and still pass the exam. But always make sure that you're studying the most current version. So the big trick I found was using multiple resources. I think Skillport had, like if your company has a learning management system, they generally have practice exams on there. So I used 3 different resources. And in the 2-week run up to the exam, I was rehearsing the exam, figuring out, okay, how long does it take to do 200 questions? How long can I sit in one place without heading to get the bathroom? How long can I concentrate on this? And how long does it take to accurately do the brain dump, and can I do it effectively? So what I did was each night I would just read a summary of one of the books. You know, kind of here's everything you need to know in the last few chapters of the book. Then I would practice a brain dump, and I would do one practice exam a night. I didn't take 4 hours a night to do it. I would do it about an hour to an hour and a half. But it was getting that rehearsal ingrained so that when I actually came to take the exam, it was not a new thing. So when you do take the exam, is get the brain dump out of the way. You get, I think, 10 to 15 minutes at the beginning. They tell you it's so you can get familiar with the computer. You know what a computer is. But use that first 10 minutes to get the brain dump out of the way. If you can't remember everything on the brain dump, that's okay. Remember what you can. Because what you'll find is as you go through the exam, you'll have something trigger. Say, oh, I need to put that down. Like how many communications channels do 5 to 7 people have? You may not remember that up front, but as you come back to the material, it's like when somebody says a song lyric and you just, oh, now I know it. It will trigger other things. Take it one question at a time. Don't worry that there's 199 more out there. It's only the one question that's in front of you. Read the entire question, then read the last sentence again. Because it does focus on reading comprehension and scenarios, sometimes they will throw in stuff that's not important. But they'll have some things that are important, but you don't know until you read it. So read the entire paragraph, then go back to what is the question you're asking. Read all 4 answers, and then eliminate the most obvious bad answer. If you can, get it down to 2 if possible. If you have to, guess. Because if you get it down to 2, you got a 50-50 shot. You've been studying this thing for some amount of time. You probably have the best answer. If you have to guess, mark the question, move on, get it out of your memory. That question is behind you. Get through the entire exam, and then only go back to the questions that you've marked. And then only change the ones they say, oh, that's the right answer. If you're still unsure, leave it alone. If you have time, go back and do a 3rd pass, but really answer each question in turn. If you're spending more than 90 seconds or 2 minutes on a question, that is far too long. You can usually mark these things down in about 30 seconds apiece. You don't have to sprint through it, but you do have to be methodical about managing your time through the exam. Okay, things that people run into. Test day pressure. How many people have test anxiety? When I was coaching students, that was the #1 problem I ran into. People say, when I have a test, I can't remember anything. Assumptions and past experience. I passed on my first try, and there are people who I coached who had decades of project management experience. They had master's degrees in management and project management. They knew this stuff better than I did. But they would rely on their past experience and say, well, this is the way we do it. Oh, sorry. My thumb is dancing there. And if you rely on past experience only, you're likely to get the wrong answer. In the ethics section on the Pmbok, one of the questions was, if you're in a foreign country, and it's customary to pay a fee to get your exam or to get your proposal read, should you do that? I'm like, not in America, it's not, because you never do that. Well, in foreign countries, if that is the custom, and it's a level playing field, some bribes may be acceptable. You have to look at the context. So you have to not rely on your past experience or your own thoughts. Is what does the Pmbok say? That is the way you do it. In Rita's book, she has a whole section about PMP-isms, about things that this is the way the exam is going to treat the question. I mentioned time or reading comprehension. Again, you have to break sentences down into the component parts, see what are they actually asking. Time management. I've had people run out of time. You got 4 hours. And really where they would get is oh, I can't get the answer to this one. I can't move on until I get the answer. You're going to run out of time. Mary.
So how do you tell people to calm down? Because as a rule, I don't suffer too much from
Right.
test anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
Exactly what you said happened, and I studied that, and I was
Right.
drawing the blank. Somehow I calmed myself down, and I was able to take it. But what did you tell people how to?
There are some tricks to calming yourself down. I mean, there are things that if you ever took yoga, they have breathing exercises. I tell people to close your eyes, take a deep breath, pause, and move on to the next question. Because if you miss one question, it's not a big deal. If you don't get to the last 40, that's a big deal. So it's setting the cost of an individual question. Now, Ryan, you had a question.
I would usually always say, this too shall pass.
Yes. And you will too.
Yeah, exactly. And if you don't pass, there's always a chance to take it over.
Absolutely.
It's not so, the problem, I think the anxiety comes when you think, oh my God, I have to pass it right now at this time.
Yeah.
That creates a lot of pressure.
What with a lot of people, myself included, is like, oh no, people will find out that I'm not smart. I'm from Indiana. I got over that a long time ago. That's what people assume going in, and so it's a surprise to anybody when they actually know something. So, Mary, to answer your question, if people are getting wound up, the best way to calm down is to reduce the cost of taking any individual exam. So why do you think I have people do a rehearsal for 2 weeks of replicating the exam conditions? Is the way I did was I would take test 1 the first night, test 2 the second night, take test 3 the third night. The fourth night, I would take a break because you can't do this in a sustained effort every night. But by the time I got to the exam, it was, okay, time to do the brain dump. Okay, here's the first question. Okay, let's go back to the formulas and look at this. So it's things that you've done before. Usually the first time you do something, like anybody here been skydiving? Anybody been skydiving twice? Okay. But if you do something fun or adventurous like that, like I used to be terrified of heights and roller coasters. But once I got over that, the first time I took a roller coaster, I'm like, I want to do this again. You probably won't be like that with the PMP exam. However, the more you replicate the experience, the less intimidating it is. Because you've been there before. You've done this. And that's one of the reasons I took the CAPM exam. I wanted to take it in a real world condition with a proctor that said, empty your pockets. Shh, all those things they tell you. You got to get permission to go to the bathroom. And it was, okay, I've been here before. So the more you can replicate that, the less intimidating it is when you actually get to the exam. Okay. So overthinking is one, we talked about test anxiety here, but overthinking. There's only 4 answers. You got a 1 in 4 shot. If you studied at all, you can mark out 2 of them. If you actually did put some effort into studying, you probably know the right one. So check that one. If you're not 100% sure, mark it, come back to it. Don't get hung up on any one question because you can run out of time. So, how do you put all this? Yes, sir.
I have a question. Would the exam consist of 200 or 150?
200 questions for the PMP.
Okay.
150 for the CAPM. And in both, you have about 25 test questions, which are not important. If you run into a question on the exam, you're like, who the heck wrote this one? Probably a test question. Treat it like any other. Mark out the obvious bad ones. Get it down to 2. Choose one. Boom, off you go. So don't get hung up on whether they're real or whether they're tests, because 25 of them are fake. They're trying to see if they're going to be applicable in a future exam. But 150 for CAPM, 200 for the PMP. You have 4 hours to do it. What I found in people I've talked to, they're generally done with the first round in 1.5 to 2.5 hours. And then the third round is generally 30 minutes to another hour. But of the people I've coached, nobody has run out of time. Because you, again, don't get hung up on one question, because that's the way you'll run out of time. So, in learning the material, what I found is use multiple sources and multiple senses to learn the material. Use sight, use sound, use physical sense to replicate what this is going to be like. In preparing for the exam, It is all about repetition and rehearsal. Repetition is the mother of skill. And it may be boring, but this is not a science exam. This is a competency exam. And the more you practice the skill, the more familiar you'll be with the material, with the formulas, with taking the exam. And then your last step is to pass the exam. Nobody wants to take it twice. It is technically not a difficult exam. It is complex from the scenario questions that they have, but if you do these things, whether you self-study, whether you do a boot camp, whether you do a combination of these things, I'm confident you'll pass this exam or any other on your first try. So I would like to see if you have any questions, and I'd be happy to answer them. Now, Ryan.
My biggest challenge, I think I've told you
Mm-hmm.
before, is basically the form itself. Getting the form filled out,
Right.
making it audit-proof.
Sure.
Is there some way to expedite that process?
I don't know about expedite, but one way to make it smoother is don't worry about making it audit-proof, because there are 800,000 PMPs globally. 800,000 people have been able to fill out that form. There are not 800,000 people who do project management every day with their title as project manager. What I found is you may not be the project manager on this project. However, you put together a schedule, you put together a budget, you figured out the sequence of events, the skills that happen with doing anything or accomplishing anything is project management. So it's figuring out how to take that experience and put it into text. If you work in the proposal world at all, we do this all the time. You say, okay, we did this over here. How do you turn that into the language they're looking for? So some of it is translating your experience into what they're looking for, but realize that if you accomplished anything, it's a project of some sort. It has a start, has a definite start, definite end. It has resources that it uses. It has budget schedules and controls that are put into place. So when you start translating it, it does make it easier. I don't know if I can expedite it, but you and I know each other. If we want to talk about the form offline, we can. But that's usually the challenge that people get, is not looking at everything that you do from a project management lens. And if you do get audited, you know, lots of people have been audited. Just document the experience and move on from there. Okay? Yes?
Do you have any experience with people who are taking portfolio or the program management test?
I've not taken the PGMP. It's like on the list. The format is similar, but they are looking at things the next level up. You know, managing multiple projects, managing things as part of a portfolio. So there'll be additional questions about that, and they'll be assuming that I think you have to have a PMP to take that exam as well. So they'll assume a certain level of experience and knowledge to do that. But I'll need to put together a set of slides, and because I'm doing one for IDLE as well. So, but I don't know the specific answer, but it is similar in format. Okay. Yes, sir.
David, you said it was three steps. You said learning the material.
Right.
I didn't get the second one.
Preparing to take the exam. What's the rehearsal you do for the exam? What are the techniques you use to repeat the material in a way that you'll retain it? So reading the books, taking a practice exam, listening to podcasts, as many senses as you can get involved in that, the more permanent that memory will be. Okay. Anything else? Who's ready to, yes, Mary.
So I'm just curious, because you said you weren't interested in doing study groups when you were taking,
Sure.
but to mentor.
Yes.
So what's your best, you know, what you find yourself telling people over and over again when you're mentoring?
Oh, yeah, and study groups versus mentoring are two completely different things.
Yeah, they are, but it's working together.
Absolutely, and I joke that I'm not a people person, but I'm not a people person. But mentoring is really talking with the person and listening to what their challenges are. And once you identify what those are, you can come up with a specific strategy to help them work through that. The most frequent one I ran into was test anxiety and mind going blank. Yeah, time management was probably the third, and then personal experience and overthinking the questions was fourth. So it's identifying what their biggest obstacle is, then helping them work through that. One of the guys I worked with at SRI, he had taken the exam 3 times and failed it 3 times. The first time I talked to him, I'm like, you know this stuff better than I do. What's the deal? And not in a condescending way. It's like, okay, let's find out what the obstacle is. And what I found was his test anxiety would get so high, his mind would go blank. And that's where I came up with, okay, let's take this down to exactly what a pilot or an astronaut goes through. You have a checklist of things that you do in a repeated fashion so many times that like, okay, it's automatic. So you take that front brain fight or flight adrenaline mix out of there, or at least reduce it to a manageable level. And once you can do that, he did fine on the 4th exam. But you know, he paid for 3, and it was getting very expensive to do that. And he was thought, well, they're going to fire me if I don't pass it. So I said, and I only worked with him on the phone. I didn't even meet him in person. It was just really listening to what his obstacles were and helping them overcome those. So the best skill a mentor can have is really listening, because a mentor doesn't have the answers. I was no smarter, and I was a lot dumber than most of the people I was coaching. It was listening, identifying the obstacle, and then helping them methodically work through that. And study groups are great for lots of people, just that I'm not one of them. Okay, anything else? Okay, who's ready to go take the exam now? Narayan, okay. And Narayan, I will work with you on your application. We'll see what you need to help on that. But if you have any questions, I think I've got my information up here. Oh, I have a resource list. My email address is david@holliworks.com. It's HOLLIWORKS.com. After this, send me an email message, say, give me the slides. And I will give you everything you've just seen up here. And if you have any follow-up questions, see me after the meeting. My information up here, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook. I have like 14,000 LinkedIn connections, 4,700 Facebook connections. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I got a blog. Although my daughter's dog has a bigger Instagram following than I do. But I'm easy to get a hold of, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have. And when you take the exam, let me know. I would love to hear how you do. Okay, thank you, Vince.